Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode until the question and answer session of the call. Question during that time, please press star followed by number 1. Today's conference is being recorded. Any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn over the meeting to Irene here. You may begin.
Welcome to today's FDA webinar. Irene Ahir of CDRH's Office of Communication and Education. Part of the FDA's ongoing effort to assure patients and providers have time and continued access to safe, effective, and high-quality medical devices, this webinar will provide developers and sponsors of neurological devices information on the pre-market approval process. The pre-approval is the most stringent type of device marketing application required by the FDA and is required because of the level of risk associated with Class 3 devices. Mike Hunt, Deputy Director of Regulatory Policy for the Division of Neurological and Physical Medicine Devices in the Office of Evaluation here in CDRH, will start today's presentation. He is one of the members of the division. Following the presentation, we will open the line for your questions related to information provided during the presentation. Additionally, other subject matter experts will join the team to assist with the Q&A portion of our webinar. Now I give you Mike.
Good afternoon. We're glad you could join us to hear some information about the PMA process. Just an idea of the agenda that we're going to go through today. We're going to give some quick introductions to the PMA process, provide information on how sponsors and principal investigators can move their products to market, some information on clinical testing, non-clinical testing, post-approval studies, bioresearch monitoring, and then the question and answer session. Again, the Deputy Director for the Division of Neurological and Physical Medicine Devices in the Office of Device Evaluation here at CDRH. We use our presentations, we size everything, which is at the CDRH vision. And I'm not going to read through each of the aspects of our vision statement. We do highlight the first one, which is that patients in the U.S. have access to high-quality, safe, and effective medical devices, public health importance first in the world. And to start at the beginning of what actually is a medical device. So a medical device is defined in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and it is defined as a device, meaning that it is an instrument, an apparatus, implement, machine, contrivance, implant, etc., for use in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, or treatment or disease in man, and is intended to affect the core function of the body in man, and does do so through chemical purposes or through action. An array of regulatory processes, and we review a wide array of medical devices which have different risks and different benefits. And these different processes are used to match up with those different types of medical devices that have those different risks. And we use the most appropriate pathway and regulatory process for each device. Today, we're focusing on the PMA process, which is highlighted at the top of the screen, and as mentioned before, is the process that we use for the highest risk devices that we review. Some examples of neurological products that we regulate here at CDRH, they include everything from deep brain stimulation devices to neurovascular devices to neurological devices to diagnostics as well. To focus a little bit more on some of the other specific devices that we have cleared and approved here, and from clot retrievers, prosthetic arms, and what we also wanted to note here is we have ablation therapies as well, have gone through the PMA process. Now gone through the PMA process, again, we match up with the appropriate risks and mitigation and make sure we use the appropriate pathway for each one. I'll turn to Tim, who's going to talk more about the regulatory requirements.
Hi, my name is, and I'm the Chief of the Neurostimulation Devices and Neurology branch. And over the next few slides, I'm just going to give a very high-level discussion of some of the regulatory requirements for PMA applications. This is going to be fairly high-level. Each individual piece could probably take up at least an hour. So just by way of explanation, more information is available in CDRH's education page, CDRH Learn. This is also device advice, which is a comprehensive collection of information that covers practically everything about our regulatory processes. So basics, the pre-market approval statute and regulations of statute can be found in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. In the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, Section 515, that establishes the general requirement for PMAs. In the CFR that corresponds to 21 CFR Part 814. I would point out that some of you may be familiar with the humanitarian device exemption, which was actually contained within 814. However, that's not going to be covered as part of this webinar here today. Relative types, there are a lot of differences when it comes to PMAs, and when thinking about whether it be a 510K or even a de novo, there's a lot more that's involved with a PMA. So for example, there's a safety and effectiveness standard. We're not talking about substantial equivalence here. You have to demonstrate that the device has a reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. There are also post-market requirements in the form of annual reporting and types of submissions related to manufacturing changes. The review process is a little bit different too, especially when it comes to original PMAs or track supplements. You have filing review, which is something that's not typically found on other types of submissions, as manufacturing review, which is also not found on other types of submissions. Requirements can also sometimes include a post-approval study. Two main ways of submitting PMA, one being the traditional route and one being a modular PMA. Traditionals are more common than the modulars, and so traditionals, you submit the complete application all at once to FDA, at which point the review begins on all of that information. PMA, however, the contents are broken down into various pieces and parts and are submitted over time. And the final module that is submitted would be the clinical module, at which point everything gets created into one single original PMA and review. Modular reviews may not suit your needs. It's going to largely depend on whether you think it is appropriate and feasible for you. And really make sure that you understand the implications and the timelines that are associated with modular review, and please feel free to ask questions if you're not sure about anything related to that. There is a guidance document. The link is here at the bottom of the slide. I highly encourage you to review that if you are interested in the modular process. Actual review process of an original PMA. The detailed information can be found again at device with the link here. So there are some important timeframes to consider at the front end. First off, there's a refuse to accept review. Those who are familiar with the 510K process, it's largely the same sort of thing, although there may be some slight variations in the types of things that we're looking for. Review is something that's not found on other types of submissions other than HDEs, and that happens within 30 days of receiving the file. And substantive review is ongoing up through for 90 days of the review of the file after we receive it. So when you're talking about the substantive review, that ends with the substantive interaction decision point, and that occurs by day 90. It can happen before, no later than day 90. And at that point, we will either request some additional information, or we'll determine that there are only minor questions in those, and that those can be addressed interactively. So if we're going to request additional information by letter, then we're going to outline what all of those questions are. We're going to tell you why we need, what needs to be changed and why we need that information. And so at that point, the clock stops. The ball is in your court to address all of those questions. If we continue because there are only minor questions, the clock doesn't stop, and try and resolve everything interactively. After the substantial interaction decision point, let's say that either we continue interactively or you've sent in a response to the letter that we sent you, we will work interactively with you to resolve all remaining questions. You should be prepared for more interactions about things like labeling or the Summary of Safety and Effectiveness document, the SSED. There's a panel meeting that's scheduled. It will likely occur after the substantive interaction decision point. Very about advisory committee input, better known panel. So this is defined in Part 814, and it says that FDA will begin substantive review of a PMA after it is accepted for filing, and we may refer the PMA to the panel on our own initiative, and will do so upon the request of an applicant unless we think it would really duplicate what's been done previously by the panel. And so the panel's input, just to clarify, is a recommendation. It's really no different in the most basic terms from getting input internally from other members of the team. It's just much more publicly, and there's much more work involved with it. So it is what makes the final decision on the PMA. Once approved, there are a number of different types of changes that can be made, and depending on the type of change, the nature of the change, there are different supplements that are submitted and reviewed in order to get those approved and into commercial distribution. Supplements are close to the original PMA. They can involve pendings, but they don't have to. It's really for when you're changing the indications. You might be adding a new indication for use to using PMA. 180-day supplements are for fairly significant changes to an existing device. Real-time reviews are slightly less significant changes. They have their own guidance document. 30-day notices are related to manufacturing changes that also has its own guidance document here that I'm not going to be able to spend a whole lot of time on, called special supplements, changes being affected. And basically that's for ruling changes that a company wants to make to help make a device safer. There is a guidance that covers all of the different types of modifications that could be done to a PMA and the associated supplement types that go along with those. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to talk about how sponsors and principal investigators move their product to market.
Thank you, Tim. So Tim mentioned there is one of the differences in the PMA process is the safety and effectiveness standard. So our definition of safety. So there is a reasonable assurance that a device is safe when, if based on the valid scientific evidence, the probability of the device for its intended uses and conditions of use, when accompanied by adequate directions and warnings against unsafe use, it has any probable risk. For effectiveness, there is reasonable assurance that a device is effective if, based on valid scientific evidence, in a significant portion of the target population, the device for its intended uses and conditions of use, when accompanied by adequate directions for use and warnings against unsafe use, will provide clinically significant results. And one of those is valid scientific evidence. So FDA relies on valid scientific evidence to determine whether there is reasonable assurance that a device is safe and effective. And there are several different sources of valid scientific evidence, according to the regulations, including well-controlled investigations, study and objective trials without matched controls, case histories conducted by qualified experts, and reports of significant human experience with a marketed device. However, these Class 3 devices, which we do under PMAs, are our riskiest devices. We rely heavily on well-controlled investigations. The plan or protocol for the study and the report should include the following: a of the objectives of the study, a selection of the subjects that includes the following: adequate assurance that subjects are suitable for the study, minimization of possible bias, comparison between the test groups and any control groups, as well as explanation of the methods and observations of recordings and the results that were used, the results of the treatment or diagnosis with a control so that we did a quantitative evaluation, and a methods of analysis and an evaluation of the data derived from the study, including any appropriate statistical methods utilized. A definition of a well-controlled study, and we have a very good system of getting feedback from FDA to determine how suitable your proposed investigation will be to support a future PMA. And the best way that we have to do that is our pre-submission program, and there's a guidance that is which we strongly encourage you to review and to take advantage of. I will now begin discussion about the non-clinical testing.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm happy to discuss the non-clinical testing with you today. It's also known as preclinical testing, and it encompasses all testing conducted outside of a human subject. So this will include performance and bench testing, which can include standards, as well as any animal testing that you use to support a PMA. Common include safety, battery reliability, if applicable, if your device has a battery, electromagnetic compatibility, including MR compatibility, biocompatibility, sterility and shelf life testing, software, gender engineering tests, as well as GLP-compliant animal studies. And for further information regarding any of these types of tests, you can look at our guidance document database and our recognized consensus standards database to see which standards FDA recognizes in support of our device submissions. Other include device-specific tests, which may or may not have specific guidance documents depending on which device you are submitting. And you should check our databases as listed on the previous slide for information about guidance documents and standards. Examples of this type of other performance testing include functional testing, demonstrate that the device will function as it is intended, mechanical testing, fatigue testing, coding integrity should that apply to your device, and others as needed. Considered testing include that the test devices should be in the identical fine finished form. So that means use the same manufacturing processes, materials, equipment, environment, etc. And the devices should also be post-sterilization processing to demonstrate that the sterilization that you plan to use does not alter the performance or outcome of the device. And if the device is not identical to the final finished form, you should only provide justification as to why that has not been done. Additions include that you should provide full test reports, not apply when testing is completed in accordance with different standards, but general summary reports do not always provide sufficient detail for us to review. And compliance with these FDA-recognized consensus standards should always be accompanied by a Form FDA 3514 to describe your compliance with these standards. Testing to alternate standards is definitely not advised if there is a corresponding FDA-recognized standard in the database. At this point, Sam will talk about post-approval studies.
Thank you very much. FDA may request a post-approval study be conducted as a condition of approval. This study is to assure continued safety and effectiveness of the approved device. These studies can be clinical or preclinical evaluations and may request long-term safety and effectiveness information that could not be addressed by pre-market data. Post-approval clinical studies may be new studies with a new cohort of patients or continuation of follow-up of patients enrolled in the investigational device exemption or IDE clinical study. We encourage applicants who are conducting a pivotal clinical study to consent subjects for long-term participation in the study, such as 5 years, in the event that long-term safety and effectiveness data may be needed as a condition of approval for the PMA. Before it is approved and during the review phase, if a post-approval study is needed, FDA will provide the applicant with the general framework for the design and endpoints of the post-approval study and concurrence will be obtained from the applicant agreeing to this general framework for the post-approval study. The full and complete post-approval study protocol can be developed and agreed upon by FDA and the applicant in the PMA review process if there is time, or this information can be submitted after the PMA is approved through a PMA supplement. Post-approval is warranted. Development agreement on the study protocol should be provided by both FDA and the applicant. Post-approval study protocol should include the following: a section that includes the regulatory history, device description, and the indication for use, a list for the study, the objectives and hypothesis of that will be evaluated, the trial design, the treatment population, which should include information regarding the inclusion-exclusion criteria, as well as the proposed comparator group. Calculation with accompanying statistical justification based on the study hypothesis, primary and secondary endpoints, the length of follow-up, including the follow-up schedule, baseline, follow-up assessment, to be collected in the collection procedure, a statistical analysis plan, data collection forms such as the informed consent form, IRB approval form, and patient report form. Summary of the reporting requirements for the and reports, and finally, study milestones and the outline of the study timeline. Proponent will submit interim reports every 6 months for the first 2 years and then annually thereafter. The date of these reports is based on the original approval date for the PMA. These reports contain an update of the study progress, a summary of the safety and effectiveness data, along with an interpretation of the study results to date. At conclusion of the study, a final report should be submitted no later than 3 months after study completion. Study is defined as all subjects having completed follow-up. If you fail the post-approval study, this may result in the withdrawal of the approved PMA. If there are patients or a particular scenario under which it is determined the study cannot be completed, this information should be communicated to FDA as soon as possible, either an interim report or PMA supplement. Regarding post-approval studies, we provide the following links. The first is FDA guidance regarding post-approval studies imposed by PMA orders. This guidance may discuss the study protocols, interim report procedures, and final report documentation. There is all logistical information that may be beneficial during the development and conduction of the study. The second is to the post-approval study public database. This database provides general status information regarding post-approval studies since January 1st, 2005. Finally, a link is for FDA's post-approval website, which provides some more general information regarding post-approval studies, as well as some additional links and resources. I will turn it over to Commander Ba.
My name is Ella. I'm with the Division of Bioresearch Monitoring. Program is a comprehensive agency-wide program of on-site inspections and data audit designed to monitor all aspects of the constant reporting of FDA-regulated research. Clinical studies are conducted all over the world. We receive data from foreign countries for pre-market approval applications. We also conduct domestic as well as foreign inspections. We conduct inspections anywhere the device study records are maintained. We have these 3 objectives, and one way we meet them is through inspections. The purpose of inspection is not to find errors, but gain confidence in how the study was conducted, and to gain confidence in the accuracy, reliability, and integrity of the submitted data. It involves interview with the site personnel, on-site evaluation of source documents, and the evaluations of systems in place to protect human subjects, to produce quality data, and to comply with applicable regulations. For PMs, the FDA investigator who is doing the inspection will do a sampling of data and peer data line listing submitted sponsors in the PMA to the source documents and the case report forms for accuracy and completeness. These of regulations that are applicable to drug devices as well as biologics. Regulations are applicable just to device clinical studies. Some of the information that BIMO reviewers will review and consider when we do site selection for inspection. We also collaborate with the review divisions and Office of Surveillance and Biometrics when we do site selection. We have 3 to 5 days to issue inspection assignments. The FDA investigator at the district will usually contact the personnel and notify them of the inspection for routine inspection. Please note that for four-cause inspection, we don't announce the inspection. The investigator may just show up at the site. Investigator arrive at the site, they will do what is called the Form FDA 482, which is the notice of inspection. They will interview site personnel and about their responsibilities in the conduct of the study, review the study records, and conduct data audit, preparing the deadline listing submitted in the PMA to the source documents and case report forms. If deviations are not, if there are any deviations from the regulations, the FDA investigator will list that on the Form FDA 483 and discuss verbally minor observations that may not be too egregious to list on the Form FDA 483. The document that the FDA investigator reviewed during the inspection. The link at the bottom of the slide is for the Compliance Pro Guidance Manual, which is the CPGM. The investigators usually use this CPGM. It provides them with instruction on the activities of sponsors during the inspection. And this CPGM has been made available to the public through the Freedom of Information Act. Sponsors and industry can use this to prepare them for FDA inspections. If a Form 483 is issued, we usually recommend that the firm provide a response to the FDA investigator during the inspection. They could or forward it to the investigator within 15 days. We also highly recommend that you document your corrective and preventive actions and make sure everybody at the farm sign the date that they complete the corrective and preventive action. As include the expected implementation date for corrective and preventive actions. At the completion, the FDA investigator usually completes an establishment inspection report, which is the EIR. The FDA investigator will forward EIR from FDA 483 if it was issued, any supporting documents to BIMO. BIMO will review the support evidence, the EIR, and the response if it was received within 15 days. The BIMO reviewer will then determine the final compliance action. Compliance certification. For AIs, BIMO will issue what we call a farm in compliance letter, the farm. EAI will issue an information letter. Official action indicated We might issue an untitled letter, warning letter, or we might recommend sanctions. Usually many opportunities for BIMO to collaborate with industry during pre-sub meetings so that we can guide industry to conduct a successful study. So contact us during pre-sub meetings and we can provide some guidance. And our information, you can reach us by phone or by email. Thank you. We now have Vasa.
Thank you. My name is Vasa Vunici. I'm a reviewer on the Division of Manufacturing Quality, Office of Compliance Safety and CDRH. The presentation, I'll be giving information on manufacturing section of the PMA. As an original module PMA, site lists and 3-day notices require manufacturing information for review. Some emissions may also require pre-approval inspections, so I'll go over that as well during this presentation. Now, original module PMAs in more detail. Discuss the major steps in the review of the PMA manufacturing information. The manufacturing information is received in the Office of Compliance in CDRH, and it is assigned to a reviewer. This information is reviewed according to 21 CFR Part 814 and Part 820. Once review is complete, if nomination for inspection is made, the assignment is sent to the ORA, the Office of Regulatory Affairs. The ORA is then responsible to conduct the inspection and complete the inspection report. That report is sent back to CDRH for final review and classification. Document, which is referenced on the slide, that lines the information that should be submitted for review. Generally, this asks for submission of procedures records for some of the subsections. The required is consistent with Part 814 and Part 820 and is divided in two sections, design controls and manufacturing controls. For the review process, it is recommended that the following be submitted with the application: a letter, overview what the manufacturing section contains and how it is organized, description, overview of the manufacturing facility, copy of the quality manual, and list of standards used in the manufacturing process. As mentioned, the guidance primarily asks for procedures related to two major sections for design and manufacturing information, which include procedures related to complaint handling and CAPA. It is helpful, in addition to procedures, to include narrative summaries of the procedures and a reference to the sections within the procedures or the location of the task procedures. Manufacturing information is required for all finished device manufacturing sites, including sterilization sites. It's recommended separate volumes be submitted, including procedures for each site. Office of Compliance reviews the manufacturing section of the MA according to the guidance document. In the review process, deficiencies are identified related to the quality system. They are communicated back to the applicant via a formal deficiency letter or email through a more interactive review process between the reviewer and the applicant. May be conducted at sites measuring finished devices, critical components, or sites performing sterilization. It's important to note in the submission the date when sites are ready for inspection, as they are scheduled on or after that date that is identified by the applicant. If the site is not ready for inspection, this may result in delayed approval of the PMA. Be considered approvable pending GMP, so it's not a good position to be in, and so it should be avoided if possible. possible. Addition for inspection is made based on the inspection history and where a similar process was covered during a previous inspection conducted at the manufacturing facilities. This applies for both domestic and foreign facilities. Now on to site change summons. Sites appropriate when sites are not approved as part of the original PMA or may supplement, or approved as part of the original PMA, but for the performance of different manufacturing activities. There is guidance that was previously issued for comment. It's very helpful and provides more details of when a site change is appropriate and prediction of when an inspection would likely be required. The information for site change is similar to the original PMA manufacturing information. However, it does not require design control information since the design would not change. It is important to provide process validation testing or state when the validations will be completed and when the site is ready for inspection. Sites subject to pre-approval inspection and follow the same time goal as the original PMA. Same as original PMAs, deficiencies related to quality system regulations are conveyed to the applicant via a formal letter or an interactive review process. Now I'll give on 30-day notices. 30-day appropriate when there is a manufacturing process change that will affect the safety or effectiveness of the device. This may include changes to the manufacturing procedure or changes to the manufacturing process or the manufacturer. The document that is very helpful and provides more details on when a 30-day notice is appropriate, and that is referenced on the slide. Of when 30-day notices are appropriate include changing a manual process to an automated process, to a cleaning process is performed in manufacturing of the device, machining lubricants, sterilization cycle, change sterilization cycle or sterility dose auditing, addition of manufacturing space, or addition of manufacturing line at the same facility. Changes appropriate for a 30-day notice include addition of a new manufacturing site or moving the manufacturing site, change to the device design, which includes changes to design specifications or material changes, and minor changes that do not affect the safety or effectiveness that are annually reportable. An acceptance of 30-day notice can be made within 30 days, or in cases when additional information is required, it can be converted to a 135-day supplement. It is common for deficiencies to be conveyed, but it's not important. But it is important to note that a conversion can be done with or without deficiencies. The review of the information within 135 days, the determination is made for approval or not approval of the supplement. Should be submitted for a 30-day notice with a clear description of the change, some data or information supporting the change, state that the change was made under requirements 520 of FD&C Act and 20 CFR Part 820, rechange including description, any adverse event or field failures being addressed. And now over to Mike for closing remarks.
Just a few quick items. So as mentioned before, we brought up the pre-submission process. It's a great way to get some feedback on your specific device, your specific issue that you would like to discuss with us. So it's very targeted. Use it to get feedback on an investigation that you're planning to conduct. You can also get information on a approach you're going to take for a future PMA or a PMA that you're going to be submitting very soon. We note that for information on some of the other regulatory processes and other related to neurology and physical medicine devices, we have an article that's published in Neuron, I encourage you to look at, as well as information about neurological devices from our FDA website that we have a specific link for here. And we'd like to leave you with, basically what this is all about. Several investigators, developers who are looking to bring high-quality devices to patients, and they are the focus of what we do here and what you all are doing as well. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We're line for questions. As a reminder, we will only be taking questions by phone. However, there are a few questions here that have been typed in. I'll read those questions and see if anyone in the room would be able to answer them. But moving forward, we're only going to be taking questions by phone. Okay, the that was typed in is, what's the difference between RTA and review?
There's a difference between acceptance reviews and filing reviews. Acceptance reviews is something that was introduced with PMAs back in MDUFA 3. It didn't used to be part of the review process. It used to be that there was just filing review and then the substantive review. What the difference is that, for instance, what we're looking at is whether the file is administratively complete, and that's true whether it's a PMA or it's a 510K. A file decision is really looking at whether the data are consistent with the protocol, the final device design, and the proposed indication. So it's almost like a light version of a substantive review. It's a little bit more targeted at something that you would only find with PMAs.
Okay. Question here is referring to slide 14. States they will refuse to accept within 15 days of receipt, which is different. The PMA review process website link you provided states 5 days. Was the change that was adapted because of 21st Century Cures Act?
The PMA, they still go through the acceptance review, and that's going to be done 15 days after the PMA gets logged in, meaning that it's passed through EAPI and it's actually been logged into the system. And then within 30 days after that, we will conduct the filing review. So there's still 2 parts to the process. The first one being the acceptance review, happens within 15 days, and then within 30 days following acceptance review, or 45 days total after the receipt of the PMA, that's when we would finish the filing review.
And final online question before we go to the phone. Can you describe how the PMA process for a Class 2 device would differ from what was presented here?
This is Mike Hoffman. It would differ quite a bit because if it's a Class 2 device, actually we have a different process for those devices. So one of the earlier slides, we mentioned that there are a host of different regulatory processes, and depending on what the risk of the device is, we will define the most appropriate process and pathway for that device. For a Class 2 device, the most often used process is our pre-market notification or 510K process. There's more information about that in our device advice online, but that is a different process.
I have any questions on the line?
At this time, but as a reminder, please press star 1 to ask a question.
For folks to
Comes from Francis Dillon. Line is open.
Hi, 2 questions. In regard to the refuse to accept period of 15 days, is this also applicable for a 3-day notice? And so would that mean that the 30-day notice period starts after the 15-day period? And the second question is there any evidence regarding the submission contents for a 180-day supplement?
This is Tim. I don't believe that there is a specific guidance document for a 180-day supplement. In general, I would tend to say that really it needs to contain sufficient information to support the change that's being made. So all of the testing that's being conducted, the protocols, the results, reports, any associated labeling, if it's something that would be changing the labeling, those sorts of things. And as always, it's the sort of thing where if you have questions about whether or not you should be including a piece of information or you're just not sure about what you should be including, please feel free to reach out to somebody within the division, because that can be a simple 10-minute phone call where you kind of quickly say, well, here's what I want to do, here's what I'm planning on providing. Does that sound about right? And we can help guide you. As far as the TA process, the TA process applies to two types of PMA submissions. That one is the original PMA, and the other one is the panel track supplement. Other supplements, all the available PMA supplements do not have an RTA review.
Okay, thank you.
Comes from Richard Russell. Your line is open.
Does the branch have any guidance or with resorbable devices in contact with the CNS?
One second for you.
Thank you.
This is Mike Hoffman. Talk about specific SINs or specific devices at this time. I'm trying to think offhand, but that might be a question that we can have with DICE, or if you want to follow up with us after the webinar, that's something that we can address.
Okay, and a question, if I could. Will the agency accept for, let's say, a spinal cord application, the same data that it will accept for a cranial application, or will you require different data for those two different anatomical sites? Data, excuse me, to be specific.
So this is Mike Hoffman again. That's probably a question that's best reserved for a Q submission. In general, when we are looking at context of use or where a device is being used, we'll look at any of the differences, and if there are similarities, we can see what we can do, but the best would be to use a Q submission to get that information.
Very much.
Che Jarrell.
Thank you. I just have a question in regards to possible permutations of the significant risk IDE PMA pathway. It's more of just an intellectual thought experiment, but I'm assuming it would be possible that you could have a significant risk IDE that ultimately could lead to a 510K, or is it the case that every significant risk IDE de facto will require a PMA?
This is Tim. So we actually come across that sort of thing all the time, and the answer is just because it's a significant risk device and it requires an IDE, that does not automatically imply that it's going to require PMA.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Councilman Patrick Gora, your line is open.
I just have a quick question about manufacturing inspections. Our device is going to be a device combo, and so we're going to actually be going through the photodynamic therapy device. And, talking about inspections at the manufacturer for the device portion, I don't know if you guys can answer this, but would that also include probably inspections at the drug manufacturer as well?
I think, because I think we're now talking about combination products. I'm very familiar on how CDER determine how they're going to conduct inspections or when they conduct inspections at their manufacturing sites. Part of the combination product, I can tell you, is that they consult CRH for the device portion, and that review we may recommend to CDER that they do part of that inspection. They also cover medical device regulations.
So yes, for your side, then you would recommend or not recommend, for whatever reason, an inspection of the device manufacturer. But do any of you guys have any experience on the combo product panels where they would also do inspection at the drug manufacturer? Would that be something that was very common or dramatic?
This would be for the combination product manufacturer. So if there's the drug manufacturer by itself, there's no, the device would not be covered in that inspection.
Okay.
Our next question, your line is open.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first, with regards to novel devices that are categorized as Class 3 devices by default, are these automatically considered significant risk, and would they require an advisory panel typically?
Understanding your question correctly, and feel free to correct me, thinking about a novel device, it used to be back in the day that would automatically be Class 3, and so part of that we came across was that not everything would be right to the level of requiring a PMA due to the risk associated with it, which is what the de novo process for things that have less risk. So, I mean, so a novel device could be a PMA or it be a de novo, depending on the level of risk that's involved. And again, that's the sort of thing that's best discussed in the context, or at least introduced in the context of a Q-sub, and possibly an informational meeting just to come in and talk about what it is, what you have, and how it may be similar or different to other things that are out there. As it relates to panel input, historically we have tended to take first-of-a-kind devices that are submitted via the PMA process to panel. I believe that's still generally true. Other times if it's the third or fourth one, we may or may not take something to panel. Again, it's a matter of whether we've gotten sufficient input from the panel in the past on the same sorts of issues. There could be something unique about a new PMA, even if it is the third or fourth of a kind, that necessitates taking it to panel. That sort of thing, that if there is the potential for taking something to panel, that is something that's discussed with the sponsor. It's not all of a sudden out of the blue, hey, there's a panel meeting and you should show up. We recognize and understand that there's a lot of work that's involved in it. It's not a trivial decision to take something to panel, so it's something that's discussed at length.
Okay, and the follow-up question to that, assuming we're dealing with a PMA device and putting together an IDE pre-submission, it would be possible or recommended to potentially combine the different aspects of a study risk determination, a determination meeting, an agreement meeting, all within a top-level Q-sub pre-submission, or does the agency recommend to keep those individual elements broken up and keep them separated?
I would say in general, it may be possible to fold in aspects of a risk determination discussion into a traditional Q-sub. However, the output of a traditional pre-submission is not going to be the sort of thing that you could take back to your IRB and say, hey, FDA has said that we have a non-significant risk device, for example. So it depends on what you need as far as that's concerned. If you have more specific questions about that sort of thing, once again, your best bet is to reach out to somebody with more specifics, and we can give you some more targeted feedback than we might be able to provide here.
Thank you.
Our next one comes from Michael Nilo.
Hi, rotation. I just had a quick question. Does the Neuro Division have a stance on the amount of OUS versus US clinical data to support PMAs?
To accept OUS data, the relative amounts of data that's OUS versus within the US, that's really something that's where in guidance saying that you need to have X percentage collected from within the U.S. versus collected OUS. I think really it's a matter of just ensuring that there's sufficient comparability between the two populations. And one running game, whenever you have those sorts of issues and you have and you are thinking about submitting a large proportion of OUS data in a PMA, it really is a good idea to come in and talk to us first, just to see whether there might be any particular issues that you need to consider when you're preparing a PMA application.
Gregor Schrafer, your line is open.
Schäfer speaking. We are doing MR safety testing, MR Comp Germany, and as MR testing laboratory, we have a lot of active implant customers also from the neuro area. Quite often we recommend to do a test plan in advance, and because the topic complicated, I have heard from FDA already, and also we recommend in the very beginning to speak to FDA. And my question is, how do you propose to manufacturers to this? Because quite often our clients saying, no, we don't like to speak to FDA in advance because they put more homework on our top than we maybe actually have. We see quite often that they're doing a circle in approval if they do not use the full test plan and standards available right now.
So this is Hoffman. So I would strongly advise that people come and use the pre-submission process. I have heard that concern before about perhaps getting information you may want to hear. I guess the real question tends to be, would you hear it beforehand when you have a chance to make some changes, or would you rather hear it after testing has been completed? And so I think after we explain that, I think people tend to have a better idea there. Because if you've already done the testing and we have some concerns with it, it may require retesting, which may more resources and more time.
And margin. And I've heard from other companies as well that they do see the value in building some time into the development process to check in with us as necessary. Just because, as Mike was saying, it's far easier to figure out the type of testing you need to do before you've actually done it. And so, and the other aspect of that too is that as we like to push the pre-submission process and as much value as it can provide, it's not always necessary. And it's the sort of thing where if you're kind of on the fence as to whether it might be a worthwhile use of everybody's time, yours, ours, you can reach out to one of us and say, hey, we're thinking about this testing. If you're doing it the same way as it's been done in the past, you're doing it to the standard, you're not really doing anything different, you don't really have much in the way of questions, we may say, well, maybe that's not going to be the best use of your time necessarily. On the other hand, you could say, well, we're thinking about doing it this way, and it is a little bit different. We think it might be okay. What do you think? And so in that case, we might say, well, it's kind of up to you. It may be worthwhile to come in and have a chat with us about it first. If you think you've got sufficient information from other sources and you can adequately justify your position and why you believe that what you're doing is an appropriate approach relative to what else has been done, that's fine too. So it
Okay, then in total you think it's a good chance to save time on both parts, especially if there's a new device and either standard bandwidth or the standards world is developing itself in the meantime as well.
Yes, I think so.
Thank you.
We have further questions, and I'll turn the call back over to Irene.
Thank you, and I hear. We have your participation and thoughtful questions. Presentation and transcripts will be available on the CDRH Learn webpage at www.fda.gov/training/CDRH Learn by today, August 3rd. If you have additional questions about today's presentation, use the contact information provided at the end of the slide presentation. As always, we appreciate your feedback. Following conclusion of the webinar, please complete a short 13-question survey about your FDA CDRH webinar experience. The survey can be found at www.fda.gov/CDRH webinar, immediately following the conclusion of the live webinar. Again, thank you for participating. This concludes today's webinar.
Participation in today's conference. Disconnect at this time.